I'm Sam Pollard, the filmmaker, director, producer, and film editor. And I've been asked to moderate this panel with the filmmakers and one of the major subjects on this documentary short that's a very, very incisive and interesting film called American Justice on Trial, People versus Newton. And it looks at the trial of Huey P. Newton, who was one of the founding members of the Black Panther Party, and this trial happened in 1968. Let me introduce the two directors and one of the major subjects in the film. Andrew Abrahams, one of the directors, and Herb Ferrette are the co-directors of the film. And one of the major subjects of the film, who was an eye-opener for me as I watched it, so which I've watched 3 times now, DAVID Harper. My first question to you, Andrew, and then Herb, you could pick up on it, is how did this film come about?
All right, well, that's a good question. It's a long answer, but I'll make it as brief as I can. This was the film came about after a book that was written by Judge Lisa Pearlman, and she became interested in this trial when someone in her circles talked about it as basically a trial of the century, and that would be the last century. And it's a trial that we don't know much about, and yet apparently it had so much importance. So she was interested in delving into that and eventually wrote a book, and the book is called The Sky is the Limit. It's about the trial and goes into much more detail than the film does. And so she wanted to make a film about this. And so it's been 9 years in the making. I came on as the second director. Before that, I was working doing cinematography for the project, and then doing some editing, and then eventually directing and producing. So I sort of like took it on I adopted this film as a child, as my child, and then brought in a co-parent, which is Herb Ferrette. That came about because when we started this 9 years ago, the climate was different. Here was a white woman wrote a book about what's seen as a Black subject, working with other white filmmakers. And specifically after the George Floyd protest, this became much more of a cultural issue. And we saw that it was important to include a Black voice in this story. And luckily we were able to find Herb. And I think the other thing that is important about this is that it echoes this idea of having diversity on the filmmaking team, also is echoing the importance of the jury itself. That was why the trial was so groundbreaking, was that it brought about a major shift in diversity in juries. And I'll let other people talk more about that, but that's basically how the film came about and how we came about making the film.
And Herb, how did you get involved as a co-director in the film?
Well, being able to, Abby Ginsberg, who's one of the EPs, producers, co-producer, that's correct, I'm sorry. And I had worked together on films that dealt with the court in San Francisco. And also I had done films through KQED on the Black Panthers years ago. And because of Abby is honestly how I became in touch with the film, and because I had and also I finished a project for the Oakland Museum to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Black Panthers, so I had enough knowledge of the Panthers, besides obviously just being attached to the subject, that I was lucky, it was nice to honestly have someone remember my work and also bring me into the fold.
Well, one of the most interesting things I always find about filmmaking is when you're collaborating with a co-director. I've done it a few times. I did it many years ago when I was in the prize, and I was terrible at it. And since then, I've done it a few more times in the last 4 or 5 years, and I've gotten better at it. How was the co-directing collaboration between you and Andrew, Herb?
Well, the biggest deal, especially coming in when I did, which was 9 years into the project, was being able to see how we each had a where the film was already on a direction. The film already had a road, or a film already was on a path. And so how I came into that on-ramp and just got into the lane was important, so that I was and what I saw as being important was how I could be a support and at the same time allow the film to come to a point where we could actually start the editing in a more aggressive manner. So things like music selection, things like reviewing the archival, which, as you know, is gigs of work. And the one drawback of nonlinear is that you don't know your subject, in my opinion, as an editor also, as well as you do in linear, because you don't see it run back and forth across the screen all the time in preview. You only see it when you click on it, and so being able to honestly review and find things and to help to reshape the direction of what was then a paper edit was the value that I saw to it in myself in the beginning.
Andrew, you want to add anything about co-directing?
It was my first project as working with two directors, and I'd say it can be challenging and rewarding. I think that's a really good way to put it, because we're not used to collaborating, especially as artists. And but as the film itself shows, that we do have better outcomes when there is diversity in the process.
One of the things I found fascinating in terms of the material in the film was not only the use of archival footage, which I'm familiar with. You use some of the Agnes Varda footage that she shot of Black Panthers. You use these wonderful sketches of the courtroom, which I thought was nice. You even had some very subtle recreations that you did in the film. Who came up with the decision to use all these different elements and having the story unfold?
Well, I think we can say it was both of our ideas to do it the way that we did it.
Okay.
And also finding, quite honestly, everyone likes the sketch idea. It was as an aside, sketch art has turned into a very specialized thing, and finding the sketch artist alone was a huge process. I mean, I was amazed at how hard it was to be able to find someone that honestly had the skills and also had the time. I was surprised, and I went through the New York Times, the LA Times. I mean, I went to what I would consider print media, which is where its birth is, and it was a challenge,
Yeah,
So,
and it's also very expensive.
Yeah,
you don't own the art.
Right, but you did an excellent job melding all these elements. I thought it unfolded in a very seamless way, very seamless. And I love the idea of the way you had the voiceover of Huey P. Newton, which it wasn't Huey's voice, but it had the flavor and the feeling and the texture of Huey's sort of dynamics and personality. Now, what's also interesting for me was the number of people you interviewed in the film. You got Brian Stevenson, you got Melvin Newton, you got Belva Davis, you got the defense attorney, and you got the police chief, who I thought was great. One of the most interesting things he says to me in this documentary is when he says that last sentence he says about Huey P. Newton, he was a thug,
Right.
And I said, whoa, that's good, guys, because you always want to hear somebody from the other side. So I thought that was great. So
I think it was also really important to add that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
It's not such a, it's not so easy. It's not an easy lens to look at Huey Newton.
No, I know it's complicated. And what I thought was interesting in terms of you, David, is in terms of you explaining how they thought you and selecting you as a member of the jury, you didn't seem to fit what they thought was the African-American mold, and that's why they made you a member of the jury. But then the way you were able to get inside your other jury members with the playing of the hearts and becoming the jury foreman, and then moving them to the acquittal of the complicated explanation of what happened at the trial, at the scene of the crime, which I never knew. I never knew exactly what happened that night. And you guys really are, because I was waiting. I says, did he shoot the guy? What happened? And then when you explained it, it was so well thought out. I thought, now I understand what happened that night with Huey P. Newton and these two police officers. So David, tell me what it was like being the jury, on the jury, and then becoming the jury foreman, and getting the other members of the jury to come to the same conclusion that you wanted to have them come to.
Well, it was academic. That I did not direct any of the jury except to set the framework for it. And that framework was what the judge said. You know, consider all the evidence, and that each person say what he thought or she thought happened, and on every piece of evidence, every conversation that they had, said, tell me what you think happened. And then we would sit on the blackboard scenarios. And sometimes we'd have 6, 7 scenarios, what people thought had actually happened. And then we voted on it and eliminated scenarios, so we got down to 1 or 2 that we could agree upon. And so that was a process. So it took us, 3 days going through the evidence. And it became obvious to us that the ballistics really told the story. Who shot who, and we found out that Newton didn't shoot. He got shot first, and then the guy that got killed, he got shot about the same time, or right after Newton did, and he returned the fire. But anyway, ballistics was the one that we worked on, but even though we had the evidence down, sometimes people would say, and then he did the dirty deed, you know, and they would say that, well, he had time to form the necessary requirements for first-degree murder, and now it's a forethought in the matter of seconds, and that didn't wash well.
Well, I thought you made that very clear, that in those moments of seconds, you're not able to rationally think.
Yeah.
In terms of how people want you to think. I mean, I thought that was really very well articulated.
Well,
I mean,
especially for Newton.
Right.
You know, he was a violent reactor, and that was his nature. You know, he emptied the bullets in the guy's back.
Right.
Anyway, it was a question about why did I ask the people not to talk about the trial? And the situation was that the jurors came in through the parking garage under and came up. Well, I walked through the crowd every day because I wasn't afraid of them. I mean, I lived in the Black community. I knew all these people, you know. And so I went up the elevator with some of the big names, and they showed me respect. And they did know that a lot of what was going to happen had to do with me. But when we were in the jury room, we could see the Black Panthers with their rifles and a lot of the noise downstairs. And then we look across to another building, and we see National Guard setting up machine guns. And so we were saying, now, here's a situation that could happen. The National Guard could very well mow down the crowd. All we needed was one shot of somebody to set it off. And so, so that was the kind of situation. And then when we came up with a verdict that we all agreed upon, then we said, look, this is dangerous now. It's going to be dangerous tomorrow. We need to make sure that we don't talk about how we got there. And we won't be news.
Mhm.
The Oakland Tribune just had one of the headlines, and Newton guilty, and that satisfied everybody.
Yeah, I think what David's alluding to here is that he created a pact with the other jurors to not talk about the trial in the media for 20 years. And so really, this is the first time that David, in this film, is the first time anybody's really talked about the trial in a major way. So it's really important, I think, just for that. And I don't know if David has any other tidbits about what hasn't been said, and that wouldn't have been said back then, but might be now.
Well, just that the framework of setting it up, and the fact that I was able to go back to work. I was a senior lending officer at Bank of America, had a master's degree, accounting degree, dealt with deals all the time. So I was well qualified to deal with the people that were on the jury. And so I understood leadership. I said, I've got to become the leader of the group. And I had the way to be the leader is allow the group to work, and then get the group to come to the right conclusions. Now, I also said, I'm not going to buy into any situation. It's going to have to be worked out by the jurors themselves. So if it turns out to be first-degree murder, it's going to be first-degree murder. But I want to make sure this man gets a fair trial, that we consider all the evidence.
Mhm.
That was the important thing. I said, the public will eventually buy into this if it was a fair trial. But right now, I don't think that anybody wants a fair trial. I think a lot of people want execution, murder. And I think that some of them want them to be off because, and I'm not sure who that is. I'm not sure the Black Panthers didn't want Huey Newton to be a
A
martyr.
martyr. Yeah.
I wasn't sure about that either. And I said, it doesn't really matter to me, as long as we do the job, do it diligently and honestly. And so I had to keep the people on that path, or keep the people that stay on that path. And but they had to do it themselves. And so they sat down, and at the end of the trial, they sat down very quietly, reflected, and then they voted manslaughter. And,
Well, he was not convicted of first-degree murder, but he was convicted of manslaughter, right?
yeah,
Correct? Right.
yeah. Well, because that seemed to be the closest thing, you know.
Right.
And his mindset at the time could have been he was defending himself, and so some people said, well, you know, that was self-defense, but he kind of killed it when he emptied the gun.
Well, I thought it was bold for you to even put that in there, that he emptied the gun into the guy. But
Yeah.
but you know, the way you articulate it, I thought it made sense.
Yeah,
It made a lot of sense. Here's a question for all three of you. What's been the reaction to the film from both sides of the aisle? I mean, it's got to be the widow of this police officer married. Did he have a family? Have you heard any response from anybody who's from the police side who's seen the film? What about former members of the Black Panthers?
The film hasn't been shown in any significant way. It's been
Oh,
at
okay.
festivals, so we did show it to George Hart, the police chief, and there's no pushback. You know, I don't think he praised the film, but there was no pushback. Also, Lloyd Jensen, who was the prosecutor, again, there was no pushback. I mean, he lost, basically. It's the story of how he lost his trial, but I think he was also he was fair. He was seen as being very fair, and I think he probably sees the film as being fair as well.
So where's the film going to?
We talk
have a
about
home?
Jensen. Jensen's the one that brought in the ballistics expert.
Mhm.
He brought him in. Once he brought the ballistics expert in and told us about ball bullets and black powder bullets and that sort of thing, so we could trace who shot who. Well, Jensen's the one that brought him in.
So what's going to be the outlet for this film? Where's it going to be on public television? Is it going to be on Netflix? Do you have an outlet for the film yet, folks?
We are the only, I think we're the only short film shortlisted for the Oscars that is not being repped by a major studio or distributed by a major studio. One of maybe one or two. And
I think there are two, yes.
It's pretty significant that we got this far without having that representation. I'm sure we will have a home. It's not, we're talking to a few different distributors right now, but that's not set in place yet.
And we
hope a nomination might change that, right, Herb?
Oh yeah, definitely. And also knowing that the biggest praise has come from law schools, et cetera, who see this as being very instrumental as far as being educational. So I because it sets a precedent. It set the precedent, and it allows the importance of jurisprudence to be brought to the forefront way again, much more, showing how the history of it and how it started. So that was always one of Lisa's main intent was that it was which is one other reason for 40 minutes. Besides that it fits a certain category, it also is appropriate for educational.
Right. Well, I think it's one of these stories again, I knew about this story to a certain level, but now I think that the way you guys dug into it and delved into it and understanding the complexity of the jury system, and that at that time, the role of David Harper in that, who Huey Newton was, because I have my own perspective about Huey P. Newton. I think you guys have done a fabulous, fabulous job. And I really applaud you guys for bringing this film to us.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And I want to thank you all for spending some time with me to talk about American justice.
And I honestly, and also again, I just want to say, David, you were extremely instrumental in the way that you influence history means a lot. It definitely meant a lot for me as I continue to research you and research the project and get more involved. So thank you for your time and what you did for history too.
Yes, and thank you, David. Also, something that didn't come out in this interview, in this panel right now, but I think is really important and telling, is that after the trial, David, who was working as a manager at Bank of America, as he was saying, not in Black America, not ensconced that after the trial, the influence that trial had on him made him want to do more for the Black community, and he went on to create a Black community bank in Detroit.
Oh.
So it's like the ripples of this trial, I think, played out in a lot of ways, personally as well as institutionally.
Huey Newton on the stand looked at me and said, "The enemy to the Black community are those that sell their services to the white man. They need to bring their skills back to the community."
Well, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right then. He's absolutely right now.
So I went to Detroit and organized the bank.
That's fantastic. Fantastic.
Never been to Detroit before, and didn't know anybody in Detroit, but I was determined to organize the bank from there.
Good. Well, thank you all, gentlemen, for participating in this panel. Good luck with the film. I have my fingers crossed.